And he asked a question that he'd like to hear the panel's perspective on the decision by the Canadian government to permit the return of repaired Nord Stream 1 turbines to Germany, a decision that has frustrated Ukraine and many of its supporters and allies. Has the federal government miscalculated in allowing this exception to its Russian sanctions? There's a similar question also being asked by Aaron D'Andrea, who also is asking similar question, but relating to just kind of more of an update that there was a report that Gazprom yesterday told its customers in Europe that it can't guarantee gas supplies because of extraordinary circumstances, adding to the fears Russia may not restart Nord Stream 1 pipeline. What do we make of this report? The government of Canada has been subject of criticism over its decisions to ship repaired turbines Nord Stream 2. So, we're seeing this, pressure from Germany. We certainly saw what seemed to be at least support, if not pressure, from the White House for this decision to happen, weakening of sanctions, but nonetheless, no guarantees that it's actually going to provide gas to Germany. Perhaps General Clark, if you want to start off with that, and we can see if General Petraeus and General Hillier would like to comment on that as well.
Well, we've been watching the Nord Stream issue very, very carefully for a long time. And obviously, we've been worried for years about Europe's indebtedness to Russia on the energy front. But I think in this case, we've got sanctions, we've got unity. We're trying to hold NATO together. I think we will hold Europe together. But I think the key to this is to understand that you have to have resilience. You have to bend but not break. You have to absorb the bumps in the road and still keep the pressure on Russia for the long term. And it does require the art of diplomacy and compromise. And that's what President Biden's leadership has brought us in NATO and dealing with the EU. Germany's been a real challenge. For years, they've cozied up to Russia. Former German Chancellor working very closely with Vladimir Putin on many issues. And so it's been difficult. Germany believed that its security was safe and they could just pursue their economic well-being. Germany's transitioning out of that mindset step by step. The hard thing about the West, if you believe in democracies, is every democracy has its own internal processes. Canada, the United States, Germany, Britain. And it's just the strength of the people that these democratic systems work from. It's very easy if you're in Russia to deceive yourself and believe that you can take an issue like this and break the alliance. I don't think that Russia can do this, but I do think that there will be other bumps in the road where some relief is given for this issue or another that helps cement the alliance together. So I wouldn't be concerned about this. I'd be looking down the road. And remember, at this point in this struggle, the military factor is the dominant factor. If we don't succeed on the military basis right now, then the rest of it is not going to help Ukraine. So we've got to get the assistance in, especially to these territorial defense forces now that are being called on to take main battle position up in the fight in the east. So accept some diplomacy, some resilience, some flexibility in the application of the sanctions. It's going to work out.
General Petraeus?
Well, I'm in broad agreement with Canada's decision. It was a very tough one. They had support from the US and Germany, encouragement. We have to reckon with the realities of energy provision, how important it is, especially for countries like Germany that have been so heavily dependent on Russian gas over the years. I'd like to build on this, though, a bit and really focus on an irony of what has taken place, because in trying to make Russia great again, what Putin has really done is make NATO great again. There's a degree of unity in NATO now that hasn't been seen since the end of the Cold War. That was even true in the days leading up to the invasion. I was at the Munich Security Conference again this year, and the unity there already, and the invasion didn't start for another couple of days following the end of that gathering. That unity is something I hadn't seen since I was writing speeches for the SAC year during the Cold War as a young major. This has really been quite extraordinary. Putin essentially pushed Finland and Sweden into the arms of NATO. It will lead to NATO expansion. This will make the Baltic Sea a largely NATO-controlled sea. And so this has truly backfired in innumerable ways for Russia. That includes, of course, the various sanctions that have been placed on the Russian economy, its financial system, Putin's inner circle. That includes sanctions in the energy area. It includes export controls that are going to make it very, very difficult for Russia to build or replace the systems, the enormous quantity of systems that it has lost on the battlefield. The number of tanks is staggering that they've lost. And again, if you can't get microchips, there's no way that you're going to be able to build new systems. This is why, after all, they're going to Iran, of all countries, to get replacements for their drones that they've lost in great numbers as well. So again, this has been an extraordinary development. As General Clark noted, the unprovoked invasion of a sovereign democratic nation. We clearly have to be on the side of Ukraine in this particular situation. This is the first invasion of that type since the end of the Cold War. The rules-based order does hang in the balance. And it is a moment where NATO has come together in an extraordinary fashion. And by and large, again, led, guided by the actions from Washington in this particular situation. That said, there are going to be very difficult calls. I think the issue of the generator return for Nord Stream 1 clearly was one of those. But again, I think Canada weighed all of the options, the information, the pros and the cons, and ultimately made a decision that I think was in the best interest, really, of all involved. Because again, if a major country like Germany is deprived its energy, the cohesion that I've just described, the unity that has been truly extraordinary since the invasion of Ukraine is going to be a potential casualty as well.
Thanks, General Petraeus. Of course, you could tell that the Stakeholder Advisory Council is not monolithic, and we have often very different views on certain things, including this issue, but I certainly welcome that. General Hillier, would you like to comment on the turbine question and the sanctions?
Yeah, Paul, just a few words, really, and I'm a slight bit, I think, more harsh on the Canadian government decision, and I wish it had been slightly different, or in fact different, as simple as that. I think maybe we are going to see two things from this, and I'm worried about both. Number one is Russia is going to see this as a sign of encouragement, that there will be decisions made that will benefit them as we go along the route. And the second thing I worry about is that we're now at 6 months, we're in the middle of summer, inflation is rearing its ugly head in the West. People are coming out of the pandemic and want to travel, and the focus is anything but Ukraine. And this decision to send the turbines back to Germany, would be seen in hindsight as maybe the time when we have now not going like this on sanctions, more and more sanctions to Russia, but in hindsight, it may be seen as the straw that broke the camel's back. And we may start to see a relenting of pressure from NATO, from the West in general. I hope that is not the case, but I think we saw after 2014 and the invasion of Crimea and what occurred, that in a very short order, the pressure from the West started to relent, and Russia was not paying the severe price that it had prior. And in this case, I worry in hindsight that the turbine decision might be the trigger that causes that to start occurring now. Instead of going upwards and onwards with more and more sanctions, that this might be the straw that causes it to turn downwards. I'll stop there.
Paul, if I could just pile on there, I think that there inevitably, in very complex situations like this, are very difficult decisions. There end up being exceptions to every rule. In this case, however, I think that the broad trend is one in which the U.S., together with its NATO allies and Western partners, are examining the supply chains of every one of the major industries, particularly those that have an impact on the battle in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, and essentially sanctioning those elements that enable the various industries through their supply chains. The best example of this was the very early export controls on export of microchips to Russia. Also, of course, you have the financial sanctions, which include the freezing of the $600 billion that Russia stashed around the world, thinking that it would avoid sanctions in that way. But to their surprise, those particular sanctions have not been violated, including by China, which is the largest holder of those foreign reserves. So again, I'm quite heartened that the direction forward is that of continuing to make these sanctions more difficult for Russia, to continue to make the supply chains more inaccessible for Russia, but that there will have to be, from time to time, if you will, prudent exceptions to the rule, because you could lose that unity that is so critical going forward. But again, a very, very difficult decision, to be sure. Thanks.